Hey guys, good morning. This video comes to you in 3 parts today, and yes, I promise I can actually count, unlike some other unnamed gentleman, John Green. But because I have a 15-minute limit on my videos still, it's going to actually be 3 videos. So, you might have approximately an hour-long vlog from me just in 3 or 4 different videos. So, the reason why it's going to be so long is because I'm very passionate about the subjects that I'm going to be talking about, and I may or may not tend to ramble. So, I got on Facebook yesterday and asked the Project Chronicles group if they had any questions related to Catholicism or religious life or any of that sort of thing, and I got 3 very intense questions. The first being, what are my thoughts on Pope Francis? I don't really know how to answer this one at this point because I feel like I don't know enough about him. He hasn't really done enough for me to formulate an opinion. His charism and spirituality are also vastly different from my own. I identified much more closely to Pope Benedict's spirituality. But, I mean, that's bound to happen. It's just gonna happen. But it's also hard because obviously the media twists everything that he says. I mean, he simply stated the fact that priestly celibacy is not dogma. He's also said he's not going to change it. He was simply stating the true fact. It is not a dogma. It is not a requirement. In fact, I have gone to masses celebrated by married priests multiple times. It's interesting. I've heard some of them say they love it. They wouldn't be able to do the priestly duties without the family. I've heard some of them say that it's a really big struggle to have a family and a parish. So that's a whole other topic. But the media twists what Pope Francis says all the time because he's very different from Pope Benedict and Pope John Paul II in that, he has a very different spirituality. He's very much in the streets, nitty-gritty. He actually really reminds me of the Pope in the book The Shoes of the Fisherman, who the book sneaks out of the Vatican and goes and has a cup of coffee and realizes he didn't bring any money with him, and he did it so he could meet the people, and then someone ends up having to buy the Pope coffee. But it's so the media doesn't really know how to deal with that. I mean, things like he's not living in the papal apartment. He rode the bus back to the hotel from Vatican when he was elected. Just things like that. I feel like the media and the church don't quite really know what to do with. Either for good or for bad. I don't feel like I have enough information to formulate an opinion, so don't take this as my opinion, because this is just what I've seen to this point. It's just it's hard to know what to think, what to say. I'm hoping to get to know a little bit more about the guy. My parents got me a book that he wrote for Christmas, so I'm hoping that'll kind of help me understand his perspective. I think part of it as well is he's from Latin America. His growing up was vastly different than mine, I'm sure. And I have a cousin who spent a lot of time in the Peace Corps in Latin America, and she and I were talking about it when he was recently elected, and she's talked about the people in Latin America have traditions, have a way of life that's just as important to them as my way of life and my traditions and my faith are to me. And he obviously, that influenced who he is, just like mine influenced who I am. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to remember. I mean, we've had European popes for years, and just kind of to remember the cultural difference, but also just the spiritual traditions are very different there. And it's a much poorer country than the US. And, just to kind of remember that is going to shape him. That's going to shape his papacy. Again, whether for good or for bad, who knows? The other thing I wanted to mention about the Holy Father, and whether for good or for bad, well, first I want to say whether for good or for bad. Until he says something heretical, I will respect him. He is the Holy Father, whether that's from God or not, whether God hit someone else in mind and the fallen human beings didn't pay enough attention, or whatever reason, he is the Holy Father. I have the utmost respect for him. But two things. Just because he's the Holy Father does not mean that it is the man that God had picked out, does not mean it is the man that is going to be faithful. I mean, look at history. We've had pretty bad popes. We've had popes who were heretics. We've had popes that were puppets of the royal family. We've had everything. I mean, they're all human. So just because, again, I'm not saying Pope Francis is good or bad, but just by the virtue of his being elected, I'm not going to say that he's good. I'm going to say I need to see for myself what he does, how he acts. The other thing I'm going to say is it's really hard for me when people, and this has kind of died out now, but I still see it happening often. People compare Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, and Pope John Paul II. And really, I mean, it's like comparing apples to toucans. I mean, it's not even two fruit. Like, they are such different men, such different experiences growing up, such different cultural, historical backgrounds, different time periods, different charisms, different personalities. JP2 was all about the youth. I mean, he was an actor. He was an outdoorsman. He was super people person. That was his charism, was getting the youth on fire for their faith. Pope Benedict was very reserved, theologian, studious, and, his charism was really teaching the meaty Catholicism. And Pope Francis's seems to be very in the streets, nitty-gritty, out there, which could be a good thing. We need it. Lord knows we need it, but it could also be not done in the best way. It could also be done coming from the wrong place, because whether it be teaching or getting the youth involved or social justice, it needs to stem from personal relationship with God. And the primary goal of every Catholic, but especially the Holy Father, should be to bring people to God. And again, we do need to be taking care of the poor. Don't misunderstand me. I think that's hugely important. And I think it's awesome that we have a Holy Father that rides the bus. I mean, I've ridden public transportation for years. I know all about evangelizing on the bus. But at the same time, it needs to come from a personal relationship with God. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Again, like I said, I don't really know much about the guy to form my own decisions, which I'm trying really hard to do, to not just listen to other people, but to really make an educated decision for myself. So I'm going to read the book, try and find a reliable source that's not going to twist everything he says. And it'll be interesting to see what happens, interesting to see what he does next. So this is going to end this part of this vlog because it's right about 10 minutes. So I will see you shortly to discuss part 2, DFTBA.